What drives an ordinary man to commit the unthinkable? In the quiet town of Merivale, Ohio, a horrifying discovery in a suburban basement would leave a community shaken, and uncover a chilling descent into darkness. It was October 15, 2021, a crisp fall morning in the sleepy town of Merivale, Ohio. The air carried the scent of rain, and leaves blanketed the quiet streets of this middle-class neighborhood. For most residents, it was just another day. But for Margaret Fields, the Whitakers' elderly next-door neighbor, something felt off. The house had been eerily silent for days, and Lauren Whitaker, a friendly nurse who always waved as she left for work, had been conspicuously absent. Concerned, Margaret dialed the local police. "It's probably nothing," she told herself. But better safe than sorry. Officers arrived at the Whitaker residence around 10 a.m. The front door was locked, and no one answered their knocks. But as they circled the house, a faint, unsettling odor drifted out from the basement window. Following protocol, Officer Ramirez entered the home through an unlocked back door. As he descended the creaky basement stairs, the smell grew stronger. His flashlight illuminated a scene that would haunt him for years. The basement was transformed into a ritualistic chamber. Black candles flickered in a circle, strange symbols painted in what appeared to be blood adorned the walls, and in the center lay Lauren Whitaker's lifeless body. Beside her, slumped in the corner, was Ethan Whitaker. His eyes were vacant, his face pale, and his hands stained red. He muttered incoherently, his voice barely above a whisper. Words like rebirth and sacrifice spilled from his lips in a chilling cadence. On a table nearby sat a ceremonial dagger, its blade glinting in the dim candlelight. The officers called for backup, and soon the house was swarming with forensic investigators. The once cozy suburban home was now a crime scene. Lauren's body was carefully examined, revealing wounds consistent with the knife found at the scene. The symbols on the walls matched known occult imagery, sending shockwaves through the investigation team. News of the murder spread quickly through Merivale. The Whitakers had always seemed like an ordinary couple. Ethan was a quiet insurance adjuster who kept to himself, while Lauren was well-loved as a compassionate nurse. To their neighbors, they were just another suburban family navigating life's challenges. But behind closed doors, something sinister had been brewing. Margaret Fields, the neighbor who called the police, was devastated. Lauren was such a kind woman, she told reporters. "I can't imagine what could have gone so wrong." For the detectives assigned to the case, the question was clear: what had driven Ethan Whitaker, a seemingly normal man, to commit such a horrific act? And why had the basement been turned into a ritual site? As the evidence piled up, it became clear that this wasn't a random act of violence or a moment of temporary madness. The ritualistic setup suggested premeditation, and Ethan's murmured references to rebirth hinted at something far more sinister. Detectives found themselves grappling with the possibility that Ethan hadn't acted alone, or that he had been manipulated into believing his actions served a higher purpose. In the days that followed, the Whitaker house became the focus of national attention. Reporters camped outside, speculating about the motive behind the crime. Social media buzzed with theories, ranging from mental illness to cult involvement. But for those who knew Lauren and Ethan, it was impossible to reconcile the loving couple they thought they knew with the horrors uncovered in that basement. As investigators dug deeper, they began to uncover the chilling truth about what had unfolded in the Whitakers' home, and the dark forces that had taken hold of Ethan's mind. But this was just the beginning of a story that would leave Merivale forever changed. Every tragedy has a backstory. To understand how Ethan Whitaker ended up in that basement, we need to rewind the clock, to his childhood, his marriage, and the cracks that began to form long before that fateful night. Ethan Whitaker was born in 1978, the only child of a factory worker father and a stay-at-home mother in the quiet town of Merivale, Ohio. From an early age, Ethan's world was shaped by two things: loneliness and expectations he could never seem to meet. His father, James Whitaker, was a man of discipline and few words, whose love was measured in accomplishments. James had envisioned a son who would excel in sports, charm everyone he met, and carry the Whittaker name with pride. But Ethan was different. He was shy, introverted, and awkward in social settings. His father's constant critiques, "Why don't you toughen up, Ethan?" or "No one respects a boy who hides behind books," left scars that didn't heal. His mother, Martha, was more nurturing but overwhelmed by her own struggles with depression. She offered comfort when she could, but her bouts of emotional absence often left Ethan to navigate the world alone. Books and computers became his escape. Ethan excelled academically, particularly in subjects like math and science, but his achievements did little to impress his father. "A perfect score won't make you a man," James would mutter, dismissing his son's accolades. These words planted seeds of inadequacy in Ethan, seeds that would grow into deep insecurities later in life. In his early 20s, Ethan attended the local community college rather than venturing far from home. It was there he met Lauren Hayes, a nursing student with a kind smile and a natural ability to make people feel seen. Lauren was everything Ethan wasn't: confident, outgoing, and empathetic. But what drew her to Ethan was his intelligence and the quiet sensitivity that others overlooked. Their relationship blossomed quickly. For the first time in his life, Ethan felt accepted and understood. Lauren encouraged him to embrace his passions, to believe in himself, and to let go of the harsh words from his past. To Ethan, Lauren wasn't just a partner, she was a lifeline. They married in 2003 and moved into a modest house in Merivalli, just a few streets away from the home where Ethan had grown up. For a time, their life seemed perfect. Lauren found work as a registered nurse at a nearby hospital, earning respect and admiration for her dedication and skill. Ethan, meanwhile, secured a job as an insurance adjuster, a stable if unremarkable career that allowed them to settle into a comfortable routine. They dreamed of starting a family and building a future together. But as the years passed, those dreams began to crumble. Fertility struggles cast a shadow over their marriage, with each failed attempt to have a child adding to the strain. While Lauren threw herself into her career and volunteer work to cope, Ethan began to feel left behind. At work, younger colleagues surpassed him in promotions. At home, he saw Lauren thriving while he grappled with a growing sense of inadequacy. Jealousy began to creep in. Ethan, who had once been Lauren's biggest supporter, now resented her success. "Why is it so easy for you?" he snapped during one heated argument. "Everything just falls into your lap while I'm stuck here, invisible." Lauren, taken aback, tried to reassure him, but the rift between them widened. By 2020, the cracks in their marriage had become chasms. Ethan's insecurities manifested as controlling behavior. He questioned Lauren about her interactions with male colleagues, accused her of prioritizing work over their relationship, and withdrew emotionally. Lauren, exhausted by the constant tension, began to confide in close friends. "I love him," she admitted, "but I don't know how much longer I can keep fighting for us." Despite the growing distance, Lauren didn't leave. She saw the same vulnerable, insecure man she had fallen in love with years ago, and she held on to the hope that he could find his way back to the Ethan she once knew. But Ethan didn't see her hope, he saw her frustration, her exhaustion, and he interpreted it as rejection. Unknown to Lauren, Ethan had started seeking solace elsewhere. Late at night, while Lauren was working her shifts at the hospital, Ethan would retreat to his computer, searching for distractions. What began as harmless browsing soon led him to forums and chat rooms where his feelings of inadequacy were echoed by others. These online spaces offered him a sense of belonging, but they also planted dangerous ideas that would eventually lead him down a dark path. From the outside, the Whittakers' marriage looked like any other. But beneath the surface, resentment, fear, and loneliness were building to a breaking point. And in the shadows of the internet, Ethan found the validation he craved, but at a price no one could have foreseen. Ethan Whittaker was drowning in loneliness, bitterness, and despair. But when he stumbled upon a mysterious online group, he thought he'd found salvation. Instead, he found a gateway to darkness. It began innocently enough, late nights at his computer, trying to escape the suffocating emptiness that had become his life. Lauren was often at the hospital, working long shifts, while Ethan sat alone in their dimly lit living room, consumed by his thoughts. His job felt meaningless, his marriage was crumbling, and his dreams of a family had turned to ash. He needed an escape, something to fill the growing void inside him. At first, Ethan wandered through harmless forums and chat rooms, places where people shared memes or discussed hobbies. But as the nights wore on, his curiosity grew darker. He found himself drawn to discussions about conspiracy theories, secret societies, and the occult. These spaces offered something his real life couldn't, a sense of purpose, a promise that there was more to the world than the mundane struggles he faced. One night, a user on a conspiracy forum posted a cryptic link, accompanied by the words, "Discover the hidden truths. Only the worthy will understand." Against his better judgment, Ethan clicked the link. It led him to a new site, with a stark black background and crimson text that seemed to pulse as he read. The site was called The Seekers of Power. The introduction was brief but enticing. Are you tired of being overlooked? Do you feel like the world has failed you? True power awaits those brave enough to seize it. Ethan's heart raced as he scrolled through the posts. Members of the group spoke of transformation, unlocking hidden potential, and breaking free from the chains of mediocrity. It was everything Ethan wanted to hear. Though a small voice in his mind urged caution, the pull was too strong. He created an account, adopting the username Seeker Ethan, and introduced himself with a simple message: "I've been searching for answers my whole life. I'm ready to find them." The responses flooded in almost immediately. Messages welcomed him, congratulating him on taking the first step toward enlightenment. But one message stood out, signed by someone calling themselves Crimson Prophet. The message read, "You are not here by accident. You were chosen. Your pain is proof of your potential." Those words struck a chord deep within Ethan. For years, he had felt like a failure, a nobody. Now, someone was telling him that his suffering had meaning. The Crimson Prophet invited Ethan to a private chat, where their conversations grew more personal. The prophet seemed to understand Ethan's deepest fears and insecurities, offering validation and encouragement. "Your wife doesn't see your potential," the prophet said during one chat. "She holds you back because she's afraid of what you could become." The idea planted itself in Ethan's mind. He began to look at Lauren differently, interpreting her exhaustion and frustration as contempt. Each argument between them seemed to confirm what the prophet had said. Ethan withdrew further, spending hours in the basement, participating in rituals and exercises assigned by the group. At first, the tasks were simple: meditations, reciting chants, lighting candles. But as he proved his dedication, the assignments grew darker. One night, Ethan received a direct message from the Crimson Prophet that would change everything: "You are ready to ascend to the next level. But to do so, you must sever the ties holding you to your old life. You must make the ultimate sacrifice." At first, Ethan hesitated. He knew what the prophet meant, but the thought was unthinkable. Could he truly harm Lauren? The prophet was patient, but persistent. Over the following weeks, their messages became more pointed: "She has blinded you to your destiny. Her light dims your power. Only through darkness can you rise." Ethan's perception of reality began to warp. In his mind, Lauren was no longer his wife but an obstacle. Every glance, every sigh, every attempt she made to reconnect was twisted into proof of her betrayal. "She doesn't believe in you," the prophet whispered in his mind. "But we do." By the time the prophet sent Ethan detailed instructions for the final ritual, he was fully under their control. The ritual required blood, symbols, and the extinguishing of the anchor in his life. Ethan convinced himself that this was his chance to finally break free from his feelings of inadequacy, to become the person he was always meant to be. He spent days preparing the basement, carefully following the prophet's instructions. Lauren, sensing something was wrong, tried to reach out to him, but Ethan brushed her off. He told her he just needed space, but in truth, he had already made up his mind. Ethan thought he had found a purpose, a way to transform his life and prove his worth. But the path he chose would lead to unimaginable darkness, and a betrayal that would destroy everything he once held dear. In the quiet basement of a suburban home, Ethan Whitaker prepared to commit the ultimate act, a ritual he believed would transform his life forever. But what he thought was salvation would turn into a horrifying betrayal. The night of October 14, 2021, was unusually quiet in Maravalli, Ohio. Rain drizzled steadily against the windows of the Whitaker home, and the only light came from the faint glow seeping through the basement window. Inside, Ethan Whitaker stood in the center of the room, his hands trembling as he positioned the last black candle in the circle. The air was heavy with the scent of burning sage and the coppery tang of blood. This was it. The culmination of months of preparation, of whispered promises from the Crimson Prophet. Ethan was convinced that this ritual would finally set him free, from his failures, his insecurities, and the unbearable weight of his unfulfilled life. The prophet's words echoed in his mind, "The chains of your past must be broken. Only then can you rise." The basement was unrecognizable. Symbols painted in crimson covered the walls and floor, each one meticulously copied from the instructions sent by the prophet. In the center of the room stood a makeshift altar, a small table draped in black fabric, holding a silver chalice, a ceremonial dagger, and a photo of Lauren Whitaker. Ethan stared at the photo for a long moment. Lauren's warm smile seemed to mock him, a reminder of everything he felt he could never be. But then he remembered the prophet's voice, "She is the anchor. Her light dims your power. To ascend, you must let go." He clenched his fists, shaking his head as if to drown out the last remnants of doubt. The prophet had been right about everything so far. Why would they be wrong about this? Ethan lit the final candle and stepped back, taking a deep breath. He began to recite the incantation, his voice shaky at first but growing stronger with each word. The flickering candlelight cast writhing shadows across the walls, and for a moment, Ethan felt a surge of energy, a sense that something greater was watching him. Upstairs, Lauren Whitaker pulled into the driveway, exhausted from a long shift at the hospital. She had planned to surprise Ethan with a home-cooked meal, a rare gesture to try and mend the growing rift between them. But as she approached the front door, she noticed the faint glow from the basement window and the rhythmic murmur of Ethan's voice. A chill ran down her spine. "Ethan?" she called out as she stepped inside. No response. The house was eerily silent, except for the muffled sounds from below. Cautiously, Lauren made her way to the basement door and pushed it open. The sight that greeted her stopped her in her tracks. "Ethan, what is this?" Her voice was shaky, a mix of confusion and fear. Ethan turned to face her, his eyes wild, his face pale and damp with sweat. "You weren't supposed to be home yet," he muttered, his voice almost unrecognizable. Lauren stepped closer, her gaze darting between the symbols on the walls and the dagger on the altar. "What's going on? Ethan, talk to me. Please." She reached out a hand, desperate to bridge the chasm that had grown between them. But Ethan didn't see his wife anymore. He saw the obstacle, the anchor. "You don't understand," he snapped, his voice rising. "This is the only way. I have to do this." Lauren took a step back, tears streaming down her face. "Do what?" "Ethan, this isn't you. Please, just stop. Whatever this is, we can fix it. We can fix us." For a moment, her words seemed to reach him. Ethan hesitated, the dagger in his hand trembling. A flicker of the man she had married appeared in his eyes. But then the prophet's words returned, louder than ever, "Hesitation is weakness. She will never let you ascend." With a guttural cry, Ethan lunged forward. Lauren screamed, but her plea was cut short as the dagger pierced her chest. Ethan didn't stop. He chanted through tears, his voice breaking as he delivered each blow. When it was over, the room was silent except for the faint hiss of the candles and Ethan's ragged breathing. He collapsed to his knees beside Lauren's lifeless body, his hands trembling as he picked up the chalice to collect her blood, just as the prophet had instructed. He anointed his forehead with it, reciting the final words of the ritual. And then, nothing. No surge of power. No divine revelation. The candles flickered out one by one, leaving Ethan alone in the darkness with the stark reality of what he had done. He stared at his blood-soaked hands, at Lauren's still face, and a scream of anguish tore from his throat. He crawled to her side, cradling her body as sobs racked his frame. "I'm sorry," he whispered over and over, rocking back and forth. But no apology could undo what had been done. Ethan Whitaker believed he was on the verge of transformation, but what he found instead was an abyss of despair. And as the truth about the Crimson Prophet and their manipulation began to unravel, the depth of Ethan's betrayal would shock an entire community. The murder of Lauren Whitaker shocked the quiet town of Merivalli, but as investigators dug deeper, they uncovered a web of manipulation and deceit far darker than anyone could have imagined. When officers arrived at the Whitaker residence on the morning of October 15, 2021, they knew something terrible had happened. But nothing could prepare them for the gruesome scene in the basement. Lauren Whitaker's body lay motionless in a circle of extinguished candles, surrounded by symbols painted in blood. Ethan Whitaker, her husband, sat nearby, catatonic, his face pale and his hands trembling. He clutched the bloodied ceremonial dagger, staring blankly into the void. Detective Rachel Monroe, a seasoned investigator with a sharp mind and an unshakable demeanor, took charge of the case. As forensic teams combed through the scene, one thing became disturbingly clear: this was no ordinary crime. The ritualistic setup, the eerie symbols, and Ethan's whispered murmurs about rebirth pointed to something far more sinister. The first breakthrough came when investigators searched Ethan's study. Among the neatly stacked insurance files and office supplies was his laptop. The screen was still on, displaying an open chat with someone called Crimson Prophet. Detective Monroe instructed the department's cyber forensics expert, Nathan Joe, to analyze the device. "Whatever's on that laptop," she said, "might tell us what led him to do this." As Joe dug through the digital trail, a horrifying picture emerged. Ethan's browser history was filled with visits to forums on the dark web, hidden corners of the internet where anonymity reigns and morality vanishes. One forum, in particular, stood out: the Seekers of Power. It was here that Ethan had first encountered the Crimson Prophet. Through chat logs and encrypted messages, Joe pieced together the story. The Prophet had lured Ethan in, feeding on his insecurities and vulnerabilities. "You are special," one message read. "Your suffering has prepared you for greatness. But to ascend, you must prove your worth." The Prophet's manipulation wasn't random, it was calculated, preying on Ethan's fractured psyche and broken self-esteem. The group's tactics were as insidious as they were effective, blending encouragement with veiled threats, ensuring that their followers felt both empowered and trapped. As the investigation deepened, Monroe and her team began to uncover the extent of the cult's reach. They weren't dealing with a small group of misfits, they had stumbled upon a well-organized, highly secretive network operating on the dark web. The cult used a combination of psychological manipulation, occult rituals, and promises of power to recruit vulnerable individuals. Ethan was just one of many victims. But the most chilling discovery was the identity of the Crimson Prophet. Using advanced decryption software, Joe traced the Prophet's IP address to a remote location in Maine. The Prophet wasn't some anonymous figure hiding behind a screen, they were Dr. Gabriel Cross, a disgraced psychology professor who had been fired years earlier for unethical experiments involving human behavior and manipulation. Dr. Cross had turned their academic expertise into a weapon, crafting a digital ecosystem designed to exploit loneliness and desperation. The cult wasn't just a group of followers, it was a machine, meticulously constructed to break people down and rebuild them into loyal acolytes. Meanwhile, Ethan remained in custody under psychiatric observation. At first, he was unresponsive, sitting in silence as doctors and investigators tried to piece together his state of mind. But over time, fragments of his story began to emerge. Through sobs and trembling hands, Ethan confessed to the murder. I thought I was doing something meaningful," he stammered during one session. The prophet said this was the only way to fix everything. But I didn't want to hurt her. I didn't want this. His guilt was palpable, but so was his confusion. Ethan had been so thoroughly manipulated that even in his remorse, he struggled to separate reality from the lies the prophet had fed him. As Ethan's story unfolded, Detective Monroe uncovered another layer of the cult's methods. Through the messages on Ethan's laptop, it became clear that the prophet had intentionally chosen Lauren as the target. They knew that breaking Ethan entirely would require more than just vague promises, it needed a sacrifice so personal, so devastating, that there would be no turning back. The prophet had studied Ethan's life, identifying Lauren as the perfect anchor to sever. Her light dims your potential, one message read. Remove her, and you will be reborn. For Monroe, this revelation transformed the case from a domestic tragedy to a calculated act of psychological warfare. They didn't just manipulate him, she said. They dismantled his entire sense of self and turned him into a weapon. Armed with this evidence, Monroe worked with federal authorities to track down Dr. Gabriel Cross. In a coordinated raid, law enforcement stormed Cross's hideout in Maine, seizing servers, encrypted drives, and ritual artifacts. Cross was arrested and charged with multiple counts of conspiracy, psychological abuse, and accessory to murder. But for Ethan, there would be no true justice. He remained in a psychiatric facility, consumed by guilt and unable to forgive himself. I loved her, he repeated to his therapist. I thought this would save us. The arrest of Dr. Gabriel Cross brought some closure to Lauren Whitaker's family, but for Ethan, the damage was irreversible. As the dark truth behind the cult was exposed, one question lingered: how many more lives had they destroyed, and how many more victims were still out there? Ethan Whitaker thought he could escape his pain by following the promises of a faceless voice. Instead, he destroyed everything he loved. But even in the darkest moments, can redemption still be found? The aftermath of Lauren Whitaker's death left a scar not only on her family and the town of Merivale but also on Ethan himself. Locked away in a secure psychiatric facility, Ethan spent his days in silence, consumed by the weight of his guilt. The whispers of the Crimson Prophet no longer haunted him. Instead, it was Lauren's face, her smile, her tears, and her final plea, that replayed endlessly in his mind. He couldn't sleep. Every time he closed his eyes, he was back in that basement, standing over her lifeless body. He often clutched his head, muttering to himself, "Why did I believe them? Why did I think this would fix anything?" The staff at the facility noted that Ethan was cooperative but distant, his demeanor alternating between numbness and uncontrollable grief. In therapy sessions, Ethan began to open up, albeit haltingly. I loved her, he whispered one day, tears streaming down his face. She was the best part of me. And I destroyed her because I thought I wasn't enough. His therapist, Dr. Maya Alvarez, listened intently, careful not to interrupt the fragile unraveling of his emotions. What made you believe the prophet? She asked softly. Ethan hesitated before replying, his voice trembling. They made me feel seen. Like I wasn't just a failure. Like my pain had a purpose. He paused, his fists clenching. But it was all a lie. They didn't care about me. They used me to hurt her, to hurt everyone. Dr. Alvarez nodded, letting his words settle in the room. You're right, Ethan. They manipulated you in the worst possible way. But facing what you've done is the first step toward understanding, and maybe, one day, forgiving yourself. Back in Marivalli, the community came together to honor Lauren's memory. At the hospital where she worked, colleagues set up a memorial wall covered in photos, notes, and flowers from patients whose lives she had touched. One message read, "Thank you for always treating me like a person, not just a patient. You'll never be forgotten." Her family organized a candlelight vigil in the town square. Hundreds of people attended, sharing stories of Lauren's kindness, her dedication to helping others, and her infectious laughter. But amid the tributes, an unspoken tension lingered, anger at the senseless loss and at the man responsible for it. Ethan wasn't allowed to attend the vigil, but he found his own way to remember Lauren. From his small room at the psychiatric facility, he began writing letters to her, letters that would never be sent. Each one started the same, "Dear Lauren, I'm sorry." In these letters, Ethan poured out his heart. He wrote about their early years together, the dreams they'd shared, and the pain he now carried knowing he'd taken it all away. He wrote about the lies the prophet had fed him, the moments he doubted but still went through with it, and the crushing realization that there was no redemption in what he'd done. One letter ended with, "I don't know if I deserve to live after what I did. But I'll spend every day I have left remembering you and trying to be the person you believed I could be." Dr. Gabriel Cross, the Crimson Prophet, was sentenced to life in prison after a highly publicized trial. Former cult members testified against them, revealing the twisted tactics used to recruit and manipulate vulnerable individuals. The trial shed light on the dangers of online radicalization, sparking nationwide conversations about mental health, online safety, and the importance of recognizing signs of emotional distress. Though the prophet was behind bars, the scars they left behind remained. Families like the Whitakers bore the brunt of the damage, pain that no verdict could erase. As Ethan continued his quiet existence at St. Andrew's Psychiatric Facility, he often gazed out the window at the small garden below. It reminded him of the memorial garden built in Lauren's honor, a place where the community could find peace and remember her light. He hoped, one day, to see it in person. Though he could never undo the harm he caused, Ethan clung to the belief that acknowledging his guilt and holding himself accountable was the least he could do. And every time he sat down to write another letter, he imagined Lauren reading his words. Maybe, he thought, she would understand why I failed, and maybe she'd forgive me, even if I never will. Ethan's story is a painful reminder of how unchecked pain and manipulation can destroy lives. But it also highlights the importance of recognizing when someone is struggling, and reaching out before it's too late. What do you think of Ethan's journey? Could he ever truly be forgiven, or is redemption beyond his reach? And how do we protect those we love from falling prey to the same darkness? Share your thoughts in the comments below. Let's keep the conversation going.